The sun beat down mercilessly on the Mongolian desert, an ocean of dust and silence stretching endlessly beneath a sky too vast to care. Inside a rough wooden box, barely long enough to lie flat, too narrow to sit upright, a woman was dying. She had no name that history remembers, no crime that could justify this agony, only the silence of a punishment older than law and more brutal than vengeance. Around her, bowls of water sat just inches away, catching the cruel glare of the sun, glistening like salvation, but never within reach. Not once were they refilled. Her lips cracked. Her voice, a ragged, dying whisper, still rose in pitiful pleas for a single drop, a crust of bread, a shred of mercy. None came. The watchers stood by, expressionless, eyes hidden behind the lenses of early cameras. Albert Kahn and Stefan P. were their names. Photographers sent to document cultures, not interfere with them. So they captured her, not in kindness, not in rescue, but in film. Her image, a face twisted by thirst, eyes swollen with despair, was frozen forever in photographic plates. Their excuse was law. The law forbade them from intervening. So they watched, silent and still, as the woman withered in real time. She was dying not in secret, but as spectacle. Her coffin was not a burial place. It was the instrument of death itself. This wasn't execution. This was a message to all who saw, to all who dared, and this was no isolated horror. This was the climax of a torment perfected over centuries. Coffin torture, a punishment that turned human suffering into public theater, that turned agony into governance, that weaponized silence, heat, time, and hopelessness. But to understand how a society could create such a thing and accept it as justice, we must go deeper, into the haunted corridors of power, religion, fear, and history. For this kind of cruelty does not rise from chaos. It is designed. The origins trace not to Mongolia, but to the cold stone cities of medieval Europe, where death wasn't just a consequence. It was a deterrent, a doctrine, a display. Imagine this. A peasant, bone-tired from labor, taxes, and hunger, scratches 3 words onto a tavern wall. Down with king. To us, it's graffiti. In their world, it was treason. And treason was not just punished, it was extinguished with such fury that even the idea of rebellion would recoil in fear. Torture was not a tool of justice. It was a ritual of power. And the coffin, an upright box where the body could neither sit nor sleep nor truly stand, became one of its most psychologically devastating forms. The condemned were sealed inside, their limbs crushed against the tight wooden walls, their weight slowly breaking them. Hours turned to days. Food was withheld, light faded, sounds dulled. And then came the slow invasion of insects, rot, and madness. But it wasn't always this dramatic. Sometimes the box stood in public squares. Bystanders jeered. Children threw rocks. Priests prayed aloud for their soul while the body inside broke. It was humiliation, starvation, exposure. It was death stretched across time like a canvas of pain. And the madness of it? The crimes didn't even need to be real. The church, whose grip on the soul was absolute, believed words could summon demons, that blasphemy had physical weight. A drunkard yelling, "Satan is my savior," in a moment of grief could suffer the same fate as a traitor. It didn't matter if he meant it. To them, intent was irrelevant. The words alone could stain the world. In such a world, where invisible forces were feared more than blades, authorities punished thought as fiercely as action. The words punished thought as fiercely as action, and punishment had to be seen. It had to be remembered. The goal was not justice, it was obedience, not correction, but fear. The coffin became the perfect symbol. Unlike the stake or the axe, it was slow, unnatural. It left space for pleading, regret, confession, and begging. It turned the condemned into a performance. People didn't look away. They watched. They brought their children. They learned. and the message etched itself into the collective mind: dissent equals death. But where did this belief, this obsession with visibility, with punishment in full view, come from? It was born from centuries of instability. In kingdoms where rulers feared uprisings, revolutions, whispers in the dark, fear became policy. Better to silence 10 innocents than let one rebel rise. Better to make an example so grotesque, so unforgettable, that even the idea of questioning power would sicken the soul. Coffin torture became the symbol of this mindset, a technology of terror disguised as tradition, and like all evil masquerading as justice, it evolved. In some regions, they added iron spikes to the inside. In others, the box was made just wide enough to allow the victim to slump, but not lie down. Sleep became impossible, madness inevitable. People begged for death, and sometimes death took days to come. But what's perhaps more chilling than the torture itself is how it was accepted, how entire populations stood by, how courts decreed it, how priests blessed it, how executioners carried it out, not with rage but routine, and how photographers, centuries later, still only watched. What does that say about us, about our species? That, given time, repetition, and the weight of tradition, even the most vile acts can become normal? The woman in Mongolia, her life leaking away in a coffin under the sun, was not a monster, nor a rebel, nor even a voice of opposition. She was a victim of history, a legacy of fear stretching across continents and generations. And even as her body failed, her image endured. A face, a box, a barren desert, a moment too cruel to be fiction, too real to forget. But there is a darker question lurking beneath it all, not just why they did this, but why it worked. Why the world around these tortures did not erupt in outrage, why families brought their children to watch, why the records kept growing. The answer may be the most terrifying of all. Humans adapt to horror, to silence, to cruelty performed as law, and the moment a society accepts suffering as spectacle, it ceases to be civilization. It becomes something else, something colder, something more honest. And in the shadowy corners of history, it's often just cruelty in ceremonial robes. As we move from the sun-scorched coffin in Mongolia to the damp dungeons of medieval Europe and beyond, a question begins to fester beneath the surface. How did an instrument of unrelenting suffering not only survive but thrive across centuries and civilizations? The coffin wasn't always made of wood. In some regions, it was crafted of iron, heated, rusted, deliberately constrictive. Victims were placed inside, naked, the metal searing flesh, pressing bone, crushing dignity. But pain wasn't the only objective. The real aim was transformation, not of the victim, but of the audience, to make people watch, recoil, then submit. Every crack of the joints, every muffled scream became a sermon in terror, and the clergy approved. The state sanctioned, the public accepted. Because fear, when finely tuned, becomes tradition. In 16th century France, public torture was as common as festivals. Coffin torture, called la cage in some circles, was used not only on criminals, but heretics, foreigners, the mentally ill, and women accused of witchcraft. These cages hung from towers, swayed in the wind, exposed to birds, storms, and the collective apathy of passers-by. Inside, people didn't just die. They decayed. Slowly, visibly. The goal wasn't execution. It was decomposition as deterrence, a rotting lesson, a symbol. And so the cages stayed up, sometimes long after the body was gone, just bones in rust, a warning written in marrow. And in a twisted way it worked. The fear kept order, not peace, but control. Generations grew up beneath the sway of these hanging coffins, accepting them as part of life's architecture, never questioning what they truly meant. But history is rarely contained to one continent. As European empires expanded, so too did their methods of suppression. Coffin torture was exported, refined, disguised under new names. In colonial outposts, rebels and resistors were locked in bamboo cages hung from trees, left for insects and gravity to finish the work. In Southeast Asia, stories emerged of barbed plants or biting ants. The shape changed, but the soul remained. A human being turned into an object of spectacle. A message, not a man. In some cases, the condemned were left alive just long enough for soldiers to bring school children to see. "Look," they'd say. "This is what happens when you defy the crown." And the children would look and remember. Because horror, when repeated enough, stops being shocking. It becomes normal, and normal becomes sacred. By the 19th century, as the Age of Enlightenment reshaped philosophy, politics, and science, you'd think such primitive punishments would vanish. But the opposite happened. The more civilized the surface became, the more inventive the cruelty beneath it. Coffin torture was adapted into psychiatric institutions, restraint boxes, isolation crates. Patients who disobeyed or simply made staff uncomfortable were locked inside dark enclosures barely larger than coffins. No food, no light, no contact, just the slow suffocation of the mind. And because it happened behind brick walls instead of city squares, it was considered modern, humane, even. This was not the justice of kings, but the science of silence. One of the most haunting examples occurred in 1880s Germany, in a now-forgotten asylum, where a patient, female, mid-30s, accused of moral hysteria, was placed in a standing coffin for 3 full days. No crime, no trial, just a physician's signature. She screamed the first day, whispered the second, and by the third she said nothing at all. The notes in her file read, "Behavior normalized." She was discharged 2 weeks later. No one recorded what became of her. Coffin torture had slipped beneath the surface. No longer public, but institutional. No longer a warning to crowds, but a tool for compliance. And yet, even in modernity, the spirit of the box endured. During World War II, some prisoners of war were subjected to confinement in upright crates for days. The Japanese called it the little bamboo cage. In Vietnam, the Viet Cong built punishment boxes so tight that men couldn't move a muscle. American soldiers captured during the war described the heat, the hallucinations, the insects crawling through their ears, and the overwhelming sense of time losing all meaning. You didn't just suffer, you unraveled. Even in the 21st century, echoes remain. Some countries still use isolation chambers so narrow they mimic coffin dimensions. Inmates placed inside for disciplinary reasons. Hours become days, days become trauma. The term has changed. The intent has not. Confinement that breaks the mind without breaking the skin. But perhaps the most chilling aspect is this: humanity doesn't just invent horror. It records it, catalogs it, archives it. Coffin torture wasn't passed down by rumor. It was illustrated in manuscripts, described in legal texts, studied by scholars, resurrected in films. We didn't forget. We remembered. Which begs a deeper question: is our fascination with cruelty a form of rebellion or complicity? The photographers in the Mongolian desert, Albert Kahn and Stefan Pu, stood behind their lenses, watching a woman rot in real time. And while their hands were tied by law, their cameras were not. They chose to capture, and in doing so, they made her agony eternal. Her body is long gone, but her image remains, proof, testament, evidence, but also a mirror. Because we are not just witnesses to history, we are its inheritors, and what we allow to be remembered reveals what we're willing to accept. Look at the box. Study its angles, its darkness, the way it constricts. Now realize that this device, this box designed for torment, has outlived kingdoms, ideologies, even religions. It has transcended culture. Because cruelty, when given enough time, becomes efficient, and efficiency makes it palatable. Easier to justify, easier to ignore, easier to use. In the end, coffin torture is not just a punishment. It is a philosophy, a way of reshaping society through fear. One victim at a time, 1 hour at a time, one breath held just long enough to become legend. And what makes it truly terrifying isn't how it ends, but how it begins, not with monsters, but with men. Men who follow orders, who believe in structure, in deterrence, in law. Men who look at a box and see not evil but necessity, and that is the true face of horror. The box is closed now, not in the desert, not in the town square, not even in the asylum, but in our minds. Sealed inside the collective memory of a species that has spent centuries perfecting the art of forgetting, just enough to move on, but never enough to truly change. Coffin torture may no longer sit openly in the center of a village, but its ghost lingers, alive in every system that chooses silence over justice, every law that trades dignity for control, every institution that hides pain behind the language of order. And so the box remains, not as wood or iron or bamboo, but as policy, as neglect, as the quiet normalization of human suffering. It has taken many forms, but its purpose has always been the same: break the body, bend the will, and remind the rest of us what happens when you question the hand that holds the keys. History tells us stories about monsters, about tyrants who twisted power into madness. But monsters are easy to hate, easy to separate from ourselves. The more disturbing truth is that the box was built not by fiends, but by functionaries, officials, judges, clergy, neighbors, people with schedules, families, and routines, people who believed they were serving order, maintaining peace, protecting morality. And that is what makes this history so unbearable to confront, that ordinary hands, not monstrous ones, did this. That civilization, so proud, so clean in its ideals, has always walked with one foot in the dark. Even today, echoes remain. Look closer and you'll see the architecture of confinement has simply evolved. In modern prisons, isolation cells are often called administrative segregation, justified as safety measures. But many are built to coffin dimensions. Inmates have described losing track of time, hearing voices, seeing the walls breathe. Some are left in solitary for weeks, months, years, without ever being charged, without ever touching another human being. And society looks away, assured by the comfort of sanitized terms and bureaucratic walls. But if you stripped away the jargon, you'd see the same ancient principle: make the body suffer until the mind surrenders. In North Korea, defectors have spoken of torture boxes, so small you had to crouch for days, your muscles screaming, your joints swelling, your spine warping, and if you cried out, they beat you for making noise. In Iran, similar techniques have been used on political prisoners. In Myanmar, in Eritrea, in the hidden corners of China, in secret black sites funded by democratic governments. The box never disappeared, it just learned how to hide. And perhaps the most haunting transformation of all, we've turned it into entertainment. In horror films, television shows, even reality challenges, we watch people locked in coffins, buried alive, left screaming for hours. We eat popcorn, we laugh, we call it fiction. But the idea, that primal fear of being trapped, unseen, unheard, isn't fiction. It's ancestral, burned into us by centuries of watching others suffer that fate for real. We dress it in story now because that's safer, easier, but the trauma is older than the script. It's older than the camera. It's as old as power itself. Still, some ask, why does it matter now? Why drag these horrors from the grave? Because history doesn't stay buried. Because systems built on cruelty don't vanish, they evolve. And the only way to dismantle them is to understand their roots, to see how a simple structure, a wooden box 6 feet high, 2 feet wide, could become a global symbol of submission, to see how fear becomes policy, how pain becomes language, because how silence becomes law. And if we fail to recognize those patterns, we repeat them again and again. We call it different names. We wrap it in science, in politics, in reform, but the soul of the coffin remains, the belief that some people deserve to disappear, that some voices deserve to go unheard, that suffering, when distant enough, can be justified. There's something else worth remembering, something rarely said. Many who were put into those coffins never confessed, never begged, never broke. Some held on, in silence, in darkness. Their last act of defiance was to remain themselves, to deny their tormentors the satisfaction of a scream. And maybe that's why those in power feared them so much, because even inside a box meant to erase them, they left a trace, a presence, a truth that couldn't be silenced. A warning not just to rebels, but to rulers. You can trap a body, but not always a spirit. History remembers the cruelty, but it also remembers the resistance, even if it was quiet, even if it was slow, even if it was unseen. And so we return to that image, the one captured by Khan and Stephen P. in the desert over a century ago. The woman's body wasting under the sun, her voice fading but still trying, her hands reaching for water she would never touch. That photograph was not just documentation, it was an indictment, a silent scream stretched across time. A relic, yes, but also a mirror, reflecting not just who we were, but who we still are. Because the coffin is not gone. It waits in systems, in silence, in the dark spaces between power and conscience. The question now is simple. Who do we become when we see it? Do we look away, like those before us? Or do we finally force the box open and face what we've buried? And this is